Hey yo everyone! Today is a sad day for my emulation friends. It was reported earlier this week that Nintendo had contacted Switch emulator Ryujinx and provided them an offer they could not refuse. Whether that offer was a big bag of money or a sniper bullet to the head, we don't know yet. As a result, the Switch emulator shut down, leaving no major emulators left for the console. So today, I want to talk about this ongoing war that Nintendo has with emulators and how it is shaping the future of video game preservation. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Alright, let's get it. Alrighty, I'm a little bit sick, so I apologize if my voice is a little bit nasally or whatever. But before we begin, let's get one thing straight. Emulators in of themselves are not illegal. However, playing illegal ROMs is where there are issues. These would be copyrighted games that are being shared illegally. You can technically rip and download ROMs for games you already own, but downloading copies of games that you didn't buy yourself and emulating them is technically illegal. But no individual has ever been prosecuted for emulating a ROM, ever, so it's kind of a legal gray area. Anyway, Nintendo has been on a crusade as of late to take down as many emulators as they can. While emulators of older consoles such as Dolphin appear to be safe, Switch emulators have been dropping like flies. Earlier this year, a popular Switch emulator called Yuzu was sued by Nintendo and eventually shut down. Nintendo alleged that Tropic Haze, the company behind the Yuzu emulator, was profiting off illegally acquired ROMs, which, like I mentioned earlier, is a big no-no. In the case, Nintendo says that Yuzu unlawfully circumvents technology that prevents Switch games from being played on devices other than a Switch. In the actual statement, Nintendo essentially says that Yuzu is allowing anyone with a PC and an internet connection to play modern generation Nintendo games without paying a dime for it. As a result, Nintendo's intellectual property rights are being violated on a global scale. The real problem for Yuzu here is that they provided detailed instructions on their website on how to install and play a ROM, which was basically the smoking gun. Like I said, the emulators are not illegal, but playing illegally acquired ROMs are, and as a distributor/profiter of these ROMs, Yuzu was held accountable. Eventually, Nintendo and Tropic Haze settled the case, with Yuzu being discontinued, their website handed off to Nintendo, and Tropic Haze paying $2.4 million to Nintendo in retribution. Then earlier this week, the other major Switch emulator, Ryujinx, was scrubbed from the internet. Apparently, the creator was contacted by Nintendo, and soon after, the emulator source code was removed from the website and official Discord. We don't know what exactly Nintendo said/offered, but it was enough for the team to take down the emulator. Now, the source code is most likely floating around out there somewhere, but it seems as if Nintendo is actively looking to make sure it doesn't gain widespread popularity like Yuzu did. If it does pick up steam again, or a new emulator source code gains traction, I'd expect Nintendo to stamp it out almost immediately. It really seems as if they're fighting to make sure that no emulators exist for their current generation, and that these most recent cases were meant to be warning shots, like the case of Gary Bowser, but that's a topic for another day. What about other emulators though? There are tons of other programs out there that are capable of running older games. Are they in danger of being shut down as well? To be completely honest, I really don't know. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they're probably fine because Nintendo is no longer distributing those consoles and games, but we'll have to see. Nintendo has made it clear that they want people to buy their games, no matter the availability or cost, because they believe it to quote-unquote strengthen their brand. With that being said, just this week, popular YouTuber Retro Gamecore tweeted that he had received another copyright strike from Nintendo. This follows a previous strike where Nintendo requested the channel take down a video showing emulated gameplay of their older games. If you aren't familiar with the channel, Retro Gamecore is a fantastic channel that specializes in retro games and systems, including modern-day emulators to play these games. So when he uploads videos showing first-party Nintendo games running on third-party hardware, it's no surprise that the big corporation would take offense. Following the second strike, Retro Gamecore writes, "It does appear that my worst fears are true, and that I am being specifically targeted by Nintendo." Unlike the Yuzu and Ryujinx cases, Retro Gamecore is making content that would have no effect on the current market. The emulators he showcases are for consoles that have been discontinued for years, if not decades. Retro did say he thought about filing a counterclaim, but is a bit reluctant to open that can of worms with a multi-billion-dollar corporation, as their next step would be to file legal action. So it sounds like Retro Game Core will continue his hardware reviews, but will try to avoid showing Nintendo titles or blur them out as a precaution. I know that's not a world-shattering change, but it is kind of a bummer because people really enjoy this dude's content, and Nintendo is just kind of being a big dick about it. So why doesn't Nintendo just go after the actual companies that are producing these machines? Well, it goes back to what we covered earlier. The manufacturers are just producing the emulation consoles, not the ROMs. They can't control what people do with their machines, although it doesn't take a genius to know that they'll certainly be running older games on them. But how, you may be asking, does this affect the overall video game industry as a whole? Well, Sony and Xbox don't really have too much to worry about when it comes to their current gen games being emulated. You see, in order to emulate an older console, your machine has to be more powerful than what it's emulating, and since the Series X and PS5 are powerhouses themselves, only a select number of super high-end PCs would actually be able to emulate their games. The Switch, however, is using pretty dated hardware, so even some lower-end PCs could emulate the device without much of a problem. But modern gen emulation is not where I think the problem lies. The problem is Nintendo themselves and the future of video game preservation. As the world becomes more and more digital, our reliance on an internet connection and corporate servers is becoming larger than ever before. The days of being able to play a game offline or lend it to a friend or sell it to a third party are quickly disappearing. As a result, more power is being granted to publishers and corporations. It's become so much of an issue that California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a law banning digital storefronts from using words like buy or purchase when it comes to digital media. Instead, companies are now forced to admit that we as consumers do not actually own any digital property, that we in fact are only buying a license to use the media and can have it taken away from us by the company at really any given moment. Obviously, this is devastating for video game preservation. Publishers and console manufacturers are clearly pushing towards a more digital future, a future where they have more control over gamers, and with that future comes the risk of losing some games entirely. I mean, just look at Concord. It's gone. What if other games get taken down just because the publishers don't want people playing it? Like, that's essentially what Activision did with the transition from Overwatch to Overwatch 2. Overwatch was shut down and is just simply gone, as if it never existed in the first place. Have you guys ever heard of the Disney Vault? Basically, Disney would limit the sales on their movies to increase an artificial demand for it. By only producing a small amount of copies, the value drove up to ridiculous prices. This practice of vaulting was used to bolster the value of theatrical releases, re-releases, and of course, their eventual streaming service, where Disney said that the platform would contain their entire film library. Of course, not everything ended up being available, so that means that some content is just locked away from the general public completely. On top of that, Disney would later go and remove underperforming movies and TV shows so they could avoid paying residuals and use it as a tax write-off. But what does any of that have to do with video games? Well, the only way to really access that vaulted content was to either have an insanely overpriced copy or pirate it. Does this sound familiar? It should, because it's exactly what Nintendo is trying to do with their IPs. I mean, just look at the Pokemon franchise. Their old ROMs are some of the most popular because people don't have a legitimate legal way to pay for them unless they want to take out a second mortgage. Nintendo is looking to create this artificial demand by refusing to make their older games more accessible. As a result, no one can have access to classic games unless they have an older machine, and unfortunately, a lot of times those machines just naturally break down over time, leaving those games unplayable. Of course, sometimes Nintendo will bring some of these games back through their online subscription service or a remaster/remake, but other times they just won't acknowledge the game's existence at all. With this much control over the market, Nintendo is able to charge whatever they want because it's really the only way for modern audiences to play these classic games. Nintendo knows the chokehold they have on their fans, which is why their games almost never go on sale, even games that are like 5 to 6 years old at this point. So if you're a fan of games like Mother 3, you'll never be able to play it again unless Nintendo decides to re-release it. Maybe there's some other classic game out there that you want your friend or sibling to experience, but is just completely unavailable because of Nintendo's artificial scarcity. All of these games and experiences and milestones in video game history are just gone. And that's why emulation is so important. The people who rip ROMs or produce emulator source code are helping to preserve the legacy of the video game industry. They're ensuring that these games are not forgotten, that they are accessible to future generations of gamers who would otherwise never get to experience the legends that built up our love for this media. So when companies like Nintendo attack what little options we have to play these legacy games, you should feel upset about it. This is video game history here. Video games at their core are an art form, a combination of visual style, storytelling, music, and gameplay. It is just so unique. It deserves to be cherished and studied and enjoyed by future generations, not locked away because some billion-dollar corporation wants to control the narrative on their IPs. I hope the Switch emulators are the only ones being targeted right now, and they can make a comeback in a few years when the Switch 2 comes out. I mean, who knows what games will be super coveted in a decade. Hopefully they'll all still be accessible, but only time will really tell. But I want to know what you guys think about all of this. What are your thoughts on Nintendo going after emulators? Do you think there is a better way to preserve video game history? I want to know all of your thoughts on this subject because it's a pretty important one to me. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It means a lot. I appreciate you guys as always, and I'll catch you in the next one.